I had never been out here before, not alone at least. The jungle felt different when you weren't with the herd. Normally, I would stay close to the others, but today I had wandered off, chasing something that had caught my attention, a rustling noise in the bushes. At first, I thought it was just a small animal, but as I followed the sound, it grew louder and seemed to pull me deeper into the trees. The air was thick, sticky with humidity, and the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves hung in the air. I realized I couldn't hear any other animals, no birds calling or insects buzzing. It felt wrong. I tried turning back, but everything looked the same. My surroundings blurred together in an endless sea of green. That's when I heard it. A snap of a twig behind me, then silence. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't alone anymore. My instinct told me to run, but where? I felt like I was being watched. The hairs on my back stood up. I turned, but there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, and the oppressive weight of the jungle pressing in. I pushed through, my breath getting heavier, legs aching, but I couldn't stop. The ground was uneven, roots sticking up like traps, and the air felt thick with the kind of stillness you only get when something is waiting. I started to panic, my hoofs slapping against the muddy earth as I rushed forward, but there was no sign of an exit. Then I saw it, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. I froze. A figure, tall and thin, with something odd about its limbs, was standing still between the trees, barely visible. I couldn't make out much, but it looked like a man, or at least something close to one. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it. It was watching me. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared. Not into the trees, no, it just vanished like smoke in the wind. I took off, not caring where I was going anymore. I needed to get out. My hoofs pounded the ground, and the familiar path I had wandered off from seemed to open up in front of me. There was no sign of that thing anymore, no more watching eyes. Just the sound of my own frantic breathing and the rustling of leaves as I moved. Finally, I stumbled out of the jungle. My herd was there, grazing calmly by the edge of the trees. I had made it out. I don't know what that was, some kind of illusion or something real. But I know one thing for sure. I won't be straying from the herd again. I've learned it that much. There are things in the jungle that don't make sense, things that stay hidden and only show themselves when you're too far from safety. But I made it out. And next time, I'll be staying close to the others. Always. I've been living alone in the jungle for 3 months now. It wasn't my choice. I got stuck here after the truck I was in broke down. I wasn't even supposed to be in the jungle, but that's how it goes sometimes. It was supposed to be a quick drive to a small village, but the breakdown was the start of something far worse than I ever imagined. The truck driver left to find help, and I was supposed to wait in the cabin, but after hours with no word, I decided to walk out. I figured I could find my way back. The jungle was dense, thick with trees, vines, and a constant, oppressive heat. It felt like the whole place was alive, watching me. I thought I'd be able to figure it out. The problem? The deeper I went, the more lost I got. After the first few days, I was struggling. Food was scarce, water even more so. I had no map, no phone, and the forest had a way of disorienting me. Every direction looked the same. There were no signs of people, just the sounds of birds, insects, and distant rustling. And then, on the 4th day, I saw it. I was sitting by a small creek, trying to catch my breath, when I saw a cow. At first, I thought I was imagining things. A cow. In the jungle. But there it was, just standing in the clearing, staring at me. I had never seen a cow in these parts before. It wasn't like the cows I'd seen in farms back home. This one was wild, its fur matted and tangled, its eyes wide, unnaturally calm, I didn't think much of it at first, but something about the cow felt off. It wasn't just the fact that it was in the jungle, it was the way it moved. Every time I tried to get closer to it, it backed away, always keeping its distance. And yet, whenever I walked in the opposite direction, it seemed to follow me, just out of sight. I thought I was being paranoid, but this kept happening for days. I started to notice more strange things. The jungle itself felt different. The sounds of animals had quieted down. It was almost as if they were being replaced by a heavy silence. Every night, I'd hear the sound of the cow moving around outside my shelter, just beyond the reach of my firelight. Sometimes, I'd hear it snorting, like it was too close, but never quite visible. The real fear set in when I noticed something I couldn't ignore. The cow wasn't just following me, it was leading me. Every time I wandered, the cow would appear at the edge of my vision, guiding me in a specific direction, always to places that felt wrong. To darker parts of the jungle. To areas that didn't feel natural. To places where the trees were denser, and the air more suffocating. One evening, after following the cow for hours, I finally found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. I had no idea how I had gotten there. The jungle had shifted around me, and I realized the cow had led me into a trap. There was no way forward, and no way back. It was as if the jungle itself had closed in on me. I tried to climb down, but the ground was too unstable. I knew I was close to the edge, but I was too exhausted to make a clear decision. That's when I saw the cow again, standing at the top of the ravine, watching me. I felt my heart race, and for the first time, I truly understood the meaning of fear. I was in the jungle, and I was alone. No one was coming to help me, but then, something unexpected happened. The cow turned around. Slowly. It started to walk away, and I don't know why, but I felt like it wasn't just leaving me behind. It was showing me the way out. I decided to follow it, trusting for the first time that it wasn't a trick. I stumbled through the jungle, exhausted, not sure if I was even going in the right direction, but I kept moving. And just as the sun was setting, I saw something through the trees, a path, a road. It wasn't much, but it was real. I don't know how the cow knew the way out, but I followed it all the way to the edge of the jungle. I was so tired, so relieved. And when I finally stepped out onto that road, I looked back once, just in time to see the cow disappear into the jungle. It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't some wild beast. It was just a cow, a creature of the jungle that knew its way better than I ever could. I didn't need to understand why it helped me. All I knew was that it had. And for that, I was alive. The jungle was thick with shadows that stretched long into the evening. I had been walking for hours, lost. The path that seemed so clear earlier had disappeared into the dense trees, leaving me with nothing but the crunching of leaves beneath my feet, and the occasional rustling from deep within the underbrush. I had come to the jungle to find something, the cow. Not any cow, but one that was rumored to roam the wild here. The locals spoke about it like it was some kind of mystery, a cow that had lived in the jungle for years, surviving on its own. They said it was a creature of habit, always near the river at dawn and dusk, moving through the trees like a shadow. I'd heard the stories too, but I had never believed them. I thought it was all nonsense, until today. I had stumbled across the cow's tracks earlier in the day, deep in the forest. The footprints were massive, too big for any normal cow. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I pressed on. I had to see it, to prove to myself that it was real. Now, hours later, I was no longer sure what I had been chasing. The sky above was already dimming, and the jungle had started to close in around me. I hadn't heard a single sound from the cow since the morning, but something was there. The silence was unnerving. I could feel the weight of the jungle pressing down on me. Then, I heard it. A soft rustling, then a snap of a twig. My heart skipped. I stopped dead in my tracks, straining to hear more. It wasn't the wind, this was something moving, something alive. I glanced around, scanning the darkening forest. The rustling came again, closer this time. My pulse quickened. Slowly, cautiously, I turned to face the sound. My eyes locked onto something moving between the trees. A figure. Large, unmistakable. It wasn't a normal cow. It was bigger, much bigger. The dark shape of the animal moved with an unnatural grace, its body blending into the shadows like it was part of the jungle itself. I stood frozen, unsure if I should run, unsure if it was even real. For what felt like an eternity, it stared at me, its dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. The jungle had gone completely still. No more rustling, no more movement, just me and this creature, locked in some silent standoff. But then, it moved. Not toward me, but away from me. It turned and walked deeper into the trees. I was left standing there, breathless, watching as it vanished into the jungle. I stayed there for a while longer, trying to steady my nerves. The silence was deafening, but somehow, I felt safe again. That thing, whatever it was, hadn't attacked me. It hadn't tried to chase me. It had simply existed. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I decided I had to get out of the jungle. The cow had been real, but there was no need to follow it anymore. It wasn't some wild creature out to get me. It was just living its life, in the way it knew best. I had never meant to end up in the jungle. It wasn't like I had a choice. It all started with a stupid dare. Me and a few friends went on a hike a few days ago, and somehow I ended up separated from the group. They were just ahead of me, but when I tried to catch up, I stumbled down a steep hill and lost my footing. I went tumbling through the thick undergrowth, and when I finally managed to stop, I was alone. The jungle was loud, too loud, and I couldn't find a way back. At first, I thought I could just retrace my steps, but the jungle was like a maze. Every tree looked the same, and there were no signs of anyone else. Hours passed, and my phone had no signal. I had no choice but to keep moving. My legs were sore, and my stomach growled with hunger. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a matter of time before I found the path back. But with every step, it got darker. The trees seemed to grow taller, the air thicker, like the jungle was closing in on me. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, the sound of rustling in the bushes. But then it came again, closer this time. My heart started racing. I tried to tell myself it was just a bird or some animal, but the rustling got louder, and I could feel eyes on me. I tried to move faster, but the ground was slippery, the undergrowth thick. That's when I saw it, two glowing eyes in the dark, peering at me from between the trees. I froze. My breath hitched. The eyes didn't blink. They just stared, like they were watching my every move. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen in place, my muscles tight, every part of me screaming to run, but too terrified to move. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in place. But eventually, the eyes disappeared into the darkness, leaving me with only the sound of my pounding heart in my ears. I didn't waste any time. I turned and ran, pushing through the trees, tripping over roots, not caring if I cut myself on the branches. All I cared about was getting away from whatever that thing was. After what felt like forever, I stumbled out of the jungle and onto a narrow dirt road. There were a couple of cars passing by, and I waved frantically until one of them stopped. The driver didn't ask any questions, just gave me a look that said he'd seen too much of the jungle's madness to care about a lost hiker. He took me straight to the nearest village. I haven't been back into those woods since, and I don't think I ever will. Every now and then, I hear stories of strange creatures or unsettling sounds deep in the jungle, but I don't need to hear any more. I know what I felt, and I know that whatever was watching me wasn't just some animal. I'm lucky I made it out. And I'm not sure how many others can say the same. I was lost. The sun had already begun to dip behind the thick canopy of trees, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. My legs ached from hours of wandering, my clothes were torn from brambles, and the weight of my backpack felt heavier with each passing minute. I had been tracking a herd of cows earlier in the day, but somewhere along the way, I lost my bearings. Now, I couldn't even remember the path back to the village. The jungle around me was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and the occasional animal call. But it wasn't the usual peaceful noise. Everything felt off. Every movement in the bushes made me jump. Every snap of a twig sounded like footsteps. I pushed forward, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. There had been whispers in the village about the wild cows that roamed deep in the jungle. Cows, I thought. What harm could they do? But something about this jungle felt different now that I was alone. It wasn't until the sun had fully set that I heard it, a low, steady sound. It wasn't a rustle. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of hooves. I froze, trying to listen more carefully, my heart thudding in my chest. The sound grew louder, closer. And then, through the darkness, I saw them. Not a herd, but one cow, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It stood still, watching me. Its body was unnaturally thin, and the way it stood, unmoving, sent chills down my spine. I took a step back, but the cow didn't move. Suddenly, more of them appeared, emerging from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the light like a pack of predators. There was something wrong with them. They didn't move like normal cows. Their posture was unnatural, their bodies too stiff, and the way they stood there, silent and unmoving, felt predatory. I could hear their hooves scraping against the dirt as they shifted, but they made no other sound. I didn't dare turn my back on them. I was trapped. There was no way around them, no clear path out. My mind raced as I thought of every possible escape, but nothing seemed safe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew better. If I ran, they would chase. The jungle was vast, and I'd be dead in minutes. So, I did what I had to. I stood still, barely breathing, trying not to make a sound. The minutes dragged on, and every second felt like an eternity. I didn't know what these cows were, but I knew they weren't normal. Their eyes followed my every move, and their bodies shifted in unison. The tension was unbearable, and then, out of nowhere, one of the cows turned and started walking away. I blinked in disbelief, but before I could make sense of it, the others followed suit. One by one, they began to retreat, slowly fading back into the shadows of the jungle. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the sound of hooves faded into the distance. I stood there for what felt like an hour, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loudly. But when I finally convinced myself the danger had passed, I slowly started moving again, my heart still racing in my chest. I didn't know what those cows were, or why they acted the way they did. But one thing was clear. I was never going into the jungle alone again. The jungle had its own rules, and whatever it was that lived deep inside, it didn't welcome trespassers. By the time I made it back to the village, the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees. The cows, the jungle, the eerie hooves, it all felt like a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. I had survived, but I wouldn't forget what I had seen. And I would never again underestimate the dangers lurking in the wild. It was just supposed to be another peaceful day in the jungle, but something felt off. I was on my usual path, moving slowly through the thick undergrowth with the sun barely peeking through the dense canopy. My feet were damp from the dew on the grass, the air heavy with the smell of earth and leaves. The jungle was always alive, but today, it felt different, quiet, unnervingly quiet. I've lived here for years, a simple life with my cattle. We don't have much, but it's enough. I know the jungle well, every tree, every rock, and the rhythm of the animals. But as I moved through the brush, I noticed something strange. The animals weren't making their usual sounds. No birds chirping, no monkeys howling in the distance. Just a heavy silence, then I heard it. A rustling behind me. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe a deer moving through the bushes. But the sound was too rhythmic, too steady. Something, or someone, was following me. I stopped, heart pounding. My eyes scanned the jungle, but I saw nothing. The brush was thick, and the shadows made it hard to see anything clearly. Still, the sense of being watched crept up on me, settling like a weight on my chest. I moved a little faster, trying to shake the feeling, but the rustling kept pace with me. Panic set in. I started walking faster, then breaking into a light jog. The rustling behind me didn't stop. It was getting closer, almost as if whatever was there was closing the distance. My breath was quick, my chest tight. I looked over my shoulder once more, and that's when I saw it, eyes. Two glowing eyes staring at me from between the trees. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't tell what it was. It wasn't big, but those eyes were cold, almost predatory. I froze. The eyes didn't move, but they seemed to follow me. My mind raced, trying to figure out what animal it could be, but the size and shape didn't fit anything I knew. It wasn't a jaguar. It wasn't a wild boar. It was something else, something I didn't recognize. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, my feet pounding the earth, pushing through the jungle as fast as I could. The rustling behind me grew louder, quicker, almost as if the thing was chasing me. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. But I didn't dare stop. I could hear it now, right behind me. The snap of branches and the steady footfalls. It was gaining on me. I glanced over my shoulder again, but all I could see was the flicker of movement in the trees, the shadows shifting. I didn't look again. I just kept running. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached a clearing. The sun hit me like a blessing, and I stopped, gasping for air. I looked around, trying to see anything that could explain what had been chasing me, but there was nothing. No glowing eyes, no predator in sight. Just the jungle, quiet again, as if nothing had happened. My heart was still racing. I didn't trust the jungle anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been following me was still out there, watching, waiting. I had to get back home, to my cattle, where I knew it was safer. The rest of the journey back was tense, every snap of a twig making me jump. I stayed alert, eyes scanning the trees. But as I finally made it back to the safety of my hut and my cattle, I let out a sigh of relief. I knew the jungle like the back of my hand, but that day, something changed. I couldn't explain it, but whatever it was, it had let me go. For now. I've stayed close to. I've always lived in the jungle. My family is simple, and we've always been out here, far from the towns and villages. We don't have much, but we manage. I'm a cow, and the jungle is where I feel most at home. It's quiet and peaceful most of the time, but recently, things have started to feel off. The first night I noticed something strange. I was grazing near the old oak tree. The moon was full, casting shadows on the ground. Everything was still, except for the usual jungle sounds, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds. But there was something in the air. I couldn't quite put my hoof on it. It felt like someone, or something, was watching me. I didn't think much of it, though. The jungle can play tricks on your senses. It's easy to get paranoid when you're alone. But then the noises started getting louder. Low growls, branches snapping, a sense of movement just out of my sight. I moved a little closer to the herd, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next few days were even worse. I stayed close to the others, but it didn't help. Every time I stopped to drink from the river, I'd hear those noises again. The growls, the rustling, even the sound of footsteps in the mud. I would look around, but there was never anything there. Just the trees and shadows. The jungle had always been my home, but now, it felt like it was hiding something from me. One night, it finally happened. I had strayed away from the others, thinking I could find some fresh grass deeper in the woods. I was hungry. The air was thick with moisture, the ground soft under my hooves. But as I walked, I heard it, a snapping of twigs, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and then, silence. Everything stopped. I froze, my heart pounding. My legs wanted to move, but they were stuck. Then I heard a rustling behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned my head just in time to see a large figure dart between the trees. Something big, but not human. A shadow, with eyes that glinted in the moonlight. I didn't know what it was. Maybe a predator, maybe something else. But whatever it was close. My instincts kicked in, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, I just ran. Branches whipped at my face, the ground uneven, but I didn't stop. I could hear the thing behind me, following. It was fast, faster than anything should be out here. I reached the clearing near the herd, but the creature didn't stop. It was still coming, closer now. I could hear its breathing, heavy and ragged, and the sound of its paws hitting the earth. I thought I was done for, but then, out of nowhere, the herd charged. My fellow cows, all at once, stampeding through the trees, pushing me forward. The creature stopped, as if it had been waiting for something. It hesitated for a moment, then retreated back into the jungle, disappearing into the night. I didn't stop running until I was back with the others. After that night, I stuck with the herd, never straying too far. The jungle, as beautiful as it is, isn't always kind. I still hear the occasional snap of a branch, or the rustling of leaves in the night, but I don't feel alone anymore. I've learned that when you're out here, you can never truly let your guard down. The jungle is unpredictable, and sometimes, it doesn't feel safe. But as long as I'm with the herd, I know I have a chance. That's all I need to keep going. The sun had just begun to set as I wandered deeper into the jungle, the dense trees blocking out most of the light. My legs were sore from walking all day, but I had to keep going. I had been lost for hours. No sign of civilization. No phone signal. Just the sound of my own breath and the occasional rustle of leaves in the distance. Earlier, I had been hiking with a group, but I'd gotten separated. It was my fault, really. I thought I knew the trail well enough, but it turns out I didn't. Now, I was completely alone, and the jungle felt alive with every step I took. The ground was soft, muddy in some places, and the air was thick with humidity. I was starting to panic when I heard it, a low, rumbling sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it didn't feel right. It sounded too deliberate, too close. I froze. It came again. It was a grunt, a noise I could only describe as coming from something large. My heart skipped a beat. My mind raced. Could it be a wild animal? A bear, maybe. I slowly turned my head to see something moving through the thick underbrush. My eyes widened in disbelief. There, in the clearing, stood a cow. A cow. In the middle of this jungle. It was a dark brown color with large, glossy eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. It wasn't like any cow I had seen before. It was wild, but still unmistakably a cow. I took a step back, unsure of what to do. It didn't seem aggressive, just there. I felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. A cow. In the jungle. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. But before I could think much further, it snorted and began walking towards me, its hooves crunching softly on the dry leaves beneath it. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen, unsure whether to move or stay still. The cow stopped, just a few feet away, its large eyes studying me. I thought for a moment it might be lost too, just like me. But then, something in its gaze shifted. It was almost like it was waiting. As if it expected something from me. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet shifted. My stomach lurched as I looked down to see the earth sinking away. I was standing on the edge of a hidden pit, deep, dark, and likely deadly. Without thinking, I lunged forward, just barely catching myself on a branch. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scrambled away from the edge, hands scraping against the rough bark of the trees. I turned to look at the cow. It was standing there, calm as ever, completely unfazed by the near fall I had just had. I was shaken, breathing hard, but grateful. The cow had led me to safety. If it hadn't been there, I might have stepped right into that pit without even knowing. It was clear then, this cow wasn't just wandering the jungle aimlessly. It was somehow aware of the dangers here, maybe even protecting the land it roamed. I stood there for a while, staring at it, my fear slowly fading away as I realized how strange this whole situation was. The jungle wasn't just a place of danger. It also had its guardians, even if they weren't what I'd expected. Eventually, I managed to find my way out, and by the time I made it back to my group, I couldn't stop thinking about the cow. Maybe it wasn't just an animal after all. Maybe it was something more. But one thing was for sure, I was lucky I had crossed paths with it. If I hadn't, who knows what would have happened. When I finally left the jungle behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched over me. Something wild, something wise. Maybe the jungle wasn't as lonely as I thought. I had never planned on wandering so deep into the jungle. I'd always stayed near the edges, where the path was clear and the trees weren't too thick. But that morning, I made a wrong turn. I didn't realize it at first. Just a few extra minutes exploring, thinking I'd turn back once I saw something interesting. But as I went on, I started to realize that everything was changing around me. The air got thicker, heavier. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the wind, seemed muffled, like they were being swallowed by the trees. After a while, I noticed something odd. The ground beneath my feet was soft and wet. The leaves were slick, as if it had rained recently, but there was no water around. Then I heard it, a low, steady sound. It wasn't an animal, but it was something big, moving slowly through the underbrush. I froze, straining my ears. It was getting closer. My heart began to race as I stepped back, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. A massive cow, its dark eyes fixed on me. It wasn't the cow I had seen on farms before, calm and docile. No, this one looked wild, its ribs visible through its fur, its coat matted and grimy. Its horns were long, sharp, and it moved slowly, its eyes never leaving mine. I could feel the tension in the air, like it was waiting for something. I thought about running, but something told me I shouldn't. The cow didn't seem aggressive at first, but I knew it wasn't afraid of me either. The jungle felt silent now, as if all the life had frozen in place, watching. I slowly started to back away, my eyes never leaving the cow. Each step I took, it followed me. It didn't charge, but its movements were deliberate, slow, as if it was guiding me somewhere. I turned to leave, my pulse quickening, but the jungle had changed around me. The trees were too thick, and the path I had come from was nowhere to be seen. The cow wasn't in front of me anymore, but I could hear it moving behind me, always just out of sight, as if it knew where I was going and wanted me to keep moving forward. I don't know how long I walked. The sun started to dip low, and the shadows grew long. My legs were tired, and I had no idea where I was anymore. I kept walking, the sound of the cow's movements fading with every step. Then, just as I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled onto a clearing. The air was fresher here. I felt a sudden sense of calm. And there, in the middle of the clearing, was a well-worn path. It was almost like it had appeared out of nowhere. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I didn't look back, but I knew the cow wasn't following anymore. The path led me back to the village, and I didn't stop running until I saw the familiar faces of the people I knew. Later, when I asked the locals about the jungle, they told me there were rumors, stories of a wild cow that roams deep in the forest, a creature that guides lost souls back to safety. It wasn't a ghost, they said. It wasn't some fairy tale. It was just a. I've been living in the jungle for a few weeks now, ever since the flood wiped out my village. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I figured out what to do next. But the days turn into weeks, and the jungle feels more like home than I care to admit. The trees here are thick, their roots twisted like old hands trying to pull you in. The sounds of the jungle are constant, birds, insects, the rustle of leaves in the wind, but there's always something about the silence in between that makes my skin crawl. It's like everything is watching, waiting. I had to get used to the dark. Out here, night comes quickly, swallowing up everything in its path. No streetlights, no electricity. Just the soft glow of the moon and the occasional crackle of a fire. That's when things get weird. At night, you start hearing noises you can't explain. I'm no stranger to the wild. I've been out here long enough to know what's normal and what's not. But last night, I heard something different. 81st. I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again. A low, heavy sound. Not an animal, at least not one I knew. It was too slow, too deliberate. I stayed still, barely breathing, trying to listen. The sound came closer. It was like something large was moving through the underbrush, its steps heavy, dragging. I grabbed the knife I had made from a rock and a long stick and went toward the sound. As I moved carefully through the dense foliage, I saw something. It was a cow. But it didn't look right. Its body was covered in dark mud and dirt, its eyes wide and wild. It was stumbling through the jungle, dragging its back leg. There was something wrong with its gait, as if it had been walking like that for a long time, too tired to stand straight. I should have turned around. I should have stayed away. But I followed it. The cow moved deeper into the jungle, its labored breaths echoing in the silence. My heart was beating in my throat, but I couldn't stop. I had to see where it was going. Then I saw it. A clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old, abandoned shack. The cow limped toward it, dragging its injured leg, and with a final groan, it collapsed on the dirt floor. I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. The air felt colder now, like something had shifted. I knew I had to leave. But as I turned around, I heard it, the sound of something breathing behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. There was nothing there. Just the cow, still lying on the ground in that empty shack. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed by the fire, staring into the dark jungle, waiting for something to happen. But it didn't. The next morning, when I went to check on the cow, it was gone. No trace of it. It was as if it had never been there. I spent hours searching the jungle, but there was no sign of it or the shack. Nothing. It was like the jungle had swallowed it whole. I don't know what I saw that night, or what it means. But it doesn't matter. I don't need to know. I'm not going to stay here any longer. I packed up my things and left. As I walked through the jungle toward the road, I looked back once. For a moment, I thought I saw the shadow of the cow in the trees, but it was gone before I could be sure. I made it back to civilization, to people and lights, and I haven't been back to that jungle. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear those dragging footsteps, but I don't want to think about it anymore. The jungle is behind me now. The cow is gone, and so is whatever else might have been out there. I'm safe now. I've always loved the jungle, but lately, things have been different. I've lived here most of my life, raised by the sounds of birds and the rustling of trees. But for the past week, something has felt off. I can't explain it. Every time I wake up, the air seems heavier. There's a strange smell in the air, a mix of something sour and metallic. It clings to the back of my throat. I live alone now. My herd moved farther out, but I stayed behind. It's easier for me to graze here. The trees give me shade, and the thick undergrowth hides me well. But lately, the place has felt like it's closing in on me. I can feel eyes on me, even though I can't see anyone. One afternoon, I decided to venture a bit farther than usual. I knew the jungle well enough to trust my instincts. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the land. I moved through the underbrush, careful not to step on any dry twigs. The jungle had a way of making even the smallest sound feel like a warning. As I walked, I noticed the birds had stopped singing. The usual chattering of monkeys and the rustle of leaves was gone. It was like the entire jungle had gone silent. I pushed through the thick foliage, brushing against sharp vines that scraped my skin. I didn't care much about the scratches. My thoughts were elsewhere. Then, I heard it. A sound I couldn't place. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it was different. It was a low, almost guttural sound, like something dragging along the ground. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest as I turned slowly to look around. Nothing. Just the thick shadows of the trees. I moved a little further, trying to calm my nerves. But then the smell hit me again, stronger now. The metallic stench was unmistakable. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, always just out of sight. The ground beneath my hooves changed. It felt soft, like mud, but with something more beneath it. I squatted down, my nose twitching as I tried to make sense of it. And that's when I saw it. Blood. The dirt was soaked in it. I had stepped into a small clearing, and there were bones scattered across the ground. They didn't look like animal bones. They were too human. I stumbled back, panic flooding my mind. The strange dragging noise was closer now. I looked around wildly, my heart racing. My thoughts were spinning. What was happening? What had been here? Suddenly, I heard a snap from behind me. I spun around, eyes wide. A figure was standing there. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It looked like a man, but its skin was stretched tight, pale and sickly. It had no hair, and its eyes were wide, crazed. It stared at me without blinking, its mouth slightly open, showing rows of yellow teeth. I didn't think. I ran. I burst through the jungle, branches tearing at my sides as I dashed back toward familiar ground. My mind was screaming, but my body moved purely on instinct. The sound of that thing's dragging footsteps followed me, but it never got closer. It was like it knew I could outrun it. So it stayed just behind, taunting me. I finally reached the river, my legs shaking with exhaustion. I didn't stop. I splashed into the water, the coolness biting at my tired body. The jungle felt safer here. The thing couldn't follow me across the river. I waited for what felt like hours, but the jungle stayed still. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the river against the shore. As I lay there, breathing heavily, the weight of what I had seen started to sink in. I wasn't imagining it. That thing was real. And it was still out there. I couldn't go back to where I had been. Not now. I didn't know if I could ever trust the jungle the same way again, but in the end, I had survived. The night passed, and I found my way back to the herd the next morning. They were grazing, oblivious to what I had experienced. For now, I stayed with them. I couldn't risk being alone in the jungle again. I'll never forget that feeling, though. The weight of the jungle pressing in on me, the quiet that followed me through the trees, and the figure that lurked just behind. But I'm safe for now. I'm still here. And maybe that's enough. I had always loved the idea of being out in the jungle. It was wild, untamed, and raw, a place where nature ruled and everything else felt distant. So when I found a job as a park ranger in a secluded part of the forest, I thought it was a perfect fit. My cabin was deep within the trees, miles away from the nearest road, and every day I'd walk the trails, checking for signs of poaching or anything unusual. One afternoon, I was making my usual rounds when I noticed something strange. A large cow was grazing alone by the edge of the forest, not far from the path. It wasn't uncommon to see cows in the area. The nearby farm often let them roam free during the day. But this one seemed off. It was far away from the farm, deeper into the jungle than I'd ever seen one before. There was something unsettling about the way it stood, its head lowered, chewing slowly as if it was waiting for something. I kept my distance at first, but curiosity got the best of me. I slowly approached, trying not to disturb it. As I got closer, I could see it more clearly. Its fur was matted with dirt, and its eyes, wide, unblinking, stared straight at me. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just the isolation of the jungle. There was something wrong with this cow. Its movements seemed sluggish, as if it wasn't quite all there. I backed away a bit, still watching. That's when I heard it. A sound, soft at first, but growing louder. A rustling from the bushes nearby. Something was moving through the undergrowth, something big. I froze, my heart pounding. I knew the jungle well, and I had never heard anything like it before. The sound grew louder, and then I saw it. Another cow. But this one wasn't walking. It was dragging itself, its legs twisted in unnatural ways. It came into view just a few yards from the first cow, its eyes the same vacant, unblinking stare. That's when I knew something was wrong. Cows don't act like this. They're not supposed to be in the jungle like this, and they certainly don't drag themselves through the underbrush in that way. My instinct told me to get back to the cabin, to get out of there.